Jay Blue.
Arjun Sachdev, how you doing?
You know, things are great. It's Monday. Had a great weekend. Spent some time at the beach. Took Buster to a few new dog parks. So we just tried to add as many adventures as we could this weekend. With
Nice, man.
friends. What was your sequence of events?
Yeah, same deal. Well, not same deal, but I had the opportunity to hang out with some friends on Friday up in San Francisco. A little social distancing, socializing, and had an opportunity to see an old friend who I hadn't seen in a little while, who lives down near me now in Redwood City. On Saturday, hung out with him and his fiance. So yeah, it was good. It was probably the first time in months that I had hung out with multiple people at the same time. But it was kind of nice to feel the energy of the crowd,
Absolutely. And the connections.
Definitely. Definitely, man. Did Buster have a favorite park, or did he make any new dog friends?
He made a ton of new dog friends, a ton of new human friends. He loves the water part of the beach, not necessarily when the sand is sticking to him,
Got it.
which was all good. I mean, we still spent a couple hours there, and he was, fighting the waves and loving it. And you couldn't really think of a better picture of seeing him in the water, just playing around. A ton of people out there. It's San Diego. It's beautiful, and you're just taking it all in. You're like, wow, this could be worse, and there's a lot of things to be grateful for. And it was one of those weekends where there was a cleansing of like the mind, a reset of how I want to be moving forward. And I feel like that's a reset you can hit every week. And so here we are, brand new week, brand new energy. I'm looking forward to it, bro.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, man. Well, I know we're slated to talk about time today. There's obviously a lot of different directions to go with that conversation. I know we both are coming to the table with our own ideas and our own content here, but I'll hand it over to you, man. I'd love to see where you want to begin the conversation.
Interesting, because I was going to actually ask you how you want to approach it, whether you want to go from the abstract level or if you want to talk about it in the like practical sense. I think the thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around and help people think through is that there actually isn't anything such as time. Like if you want to talk about time, like save the conversation. There actually isn't a thing as time. There are events though. So, if you think about this, I mean, have you ever heard of Ferenc Krauss?
I have not. No, tell me more.
He's he's a Hungarian Austrian physicist, and he runs an institute of quantum optics in Germany. And what they did there is what they discovered this thing called the attosecond, ATTO second. And have you ever heard of that?
No.
Listen, so look, this is going down a really abstract way of thinking. Do you want to go down this route?
Let's go. Yeah, let's go there. I didn't have any like research attached to that, but I had some thinking on the idea that time is maybe more elusive than we realize. So I'd love to hear what you have to share based on what you learned and see if some of my ideas map over that.
Oh, I think they will, because you're going to start to look at time differently and it'll apply. So anyway, Ferenc Krauss, he's a physicist. They're out there in Germany. They discovered this thing called the attosecond. So basically his team, they clocked the shortest time intervals ever observed. So they're using these UV lasers and they're pulsing them. And that's how they're actually tracking the ridiculously brief quantum leaps of electrons within atoms. So let's just put this in perspective. He is figured, or his research has led him to get down to what they're calling 100 attoseconds. So the event that he was able to capture lasts for about 100 attoseconds. To put that in perspective, 100 attoseconds is to 1 second what 1 second is to 300 million years.
Oh my word. Wow.
All right. So we're going to bend the mind a little bit, because now if you start to really think about, does time exist? Well, maybe not. If you ask even this physicist, Ferenc, I mean, people are actually saying that he's not even on the brink of the frontier of time, even though he's gotten down to 100 attoseconds. Apparently, there's a scale out there that's called the Planck scale. And even in that world, attoseconds, they drag by like it takes forever. So look, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a scientist. I don't want to, you know, portray myself like that. This is something that's super, super interesting because now we're on the point of like the edge of known physics where the distances between time are so short that the concepts of time and space actually start to break down. It's called the Planck scale.
Interesting.
All right. So before I move on, I mean, it's like, I want to get your perspective of how you think you might be able to weave what you were thinking about with what I've said so far.
Yeah, well, so I had been thinking about sort of time and the present moment, and I think most people would agree that both the future and the past are sort of constructions, and all we really have are the present moment. You know, the past is either a memory, you know, or the future is a visualization of what will come, but really the only thing that we can hold on to is the time we have right now. But you know, I think when you actually start to sink your teeth into that notion, it becomes difficult to pinpoint what exactly is the present moment, because you know, most people would say a year is way too long to be the present moment, a week is still way too long to be the present moment, even a day. So what is it then? Is it a second? Is it a trillionth of a second? You know, if you've ever been driving down the highway and you've had to avert, you know, someone coming into your lane in you know, lightning at a lightning fast speed, you can appreciate that you experience that in less than a second. But where exactly do we define that threshold of what the present moment actually is? You know, is it, if we were to talk in terms of attoseconds, exactly how many of those attoseconds constitute the present? And I think what you're kind of left with is a realization that more so than like having something, a concrete unit of time define the present is primarily defined by its fluidity. And you know, I think like you think of you know, the motif of the river in Eastern philosophy, and I think that was a really powerful way of kind of conceptualizing and representing human experience, because you know, just as a river is never static, you know, it's never defined by where water is at any given moment, it's defined by the movement of that water. I think so too is like our, you know, phenomenology of human experience, in the sense that, you know, the second you try to latch onto now, it's gone. You know, the second I've said, tried to sort of trap now and hold it in my hands, it's already behind me. So yeah, I think that there's an elusiveness to the present moment, and I think it's, I guess, you know, from a mental health standpoint, I think there are benefits to sort of accepting the fluidity of the moment and the overall transience of life in general. So yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
No, I mean, look, and I feel like this is one of those things where it's a worrisome thing to think like that. And so when you stop to think, when you stop thinking of time as time and you begin to think of them as events, that's how you change your mental perspective. Because when it's no longer time, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future, and you're actually not even thinking about the present. All you're thinking about is it as an event. So, like, let me go back to this attosecond and the ridiculous amount, how short that time was, and you know why it's still something that people are talking about. Because if you look at over the last 20 years, there's actually physicists that are out there who are becoming more agnostic on this whole conversation of what is time. And what happened was, it goes back to Einstein. So if we're going to try to find some intersections and answer some deep questions, we have to look at what Einstein did. So he had the special and general theories of relativity, but by bringing that out there, the universal constant idea went away. So one of that when you realize that, then you realize that the past, the present, and the future are not absolutes. You were asking, what exactly is the present moment? To me, the present moment is the event that's occurring right now. Don't think of it as a time, think of it as an event. So now what happened is that you have a rift because his rules, which describe gravity, they describe the large scale of the cosmos, all of a sudden they're not compatible with the quantum mechanics which govern the realm of the tiny. You know what I mean? Like that attosecond universe is so tiny that the rules of gravity may or relativity may not really exist there. So that's the difference. So what happened was about 50 years ago, there was two professors that came out. One was from Princeton and one was from North Carolina. And they came up with this Wheeler-DeWitt equation. It's named after themselves. And this is an equation where you have scientists and a mathematician trying to unify relativity and quantum mechanics. So they're trying to find an intersection between their own field. I know it's science, it's related, but now you have folks. I mean, I love this as an example of people who are looking to find connection between different areas, right? They're looking to think laterally. They're looking to find out new answers. They're trying to test things out.
So tell me more about the idea of thinking of time as an event, or the present moment as an event, or thinking of the universe as being comprised of events rather than units of time.
Yeah,
In the sense that you can't, time is an abstract thing that you can't really assign to the physical world. All you can really define the physical world as is like a series of physical mechanical events that some are happening at a higher level and some are happening at a lower level. And once you get to the layer of quantum physics, then everything we know about the events at the higher level starts to not carry in that field as well. Is that the idea?
well, so what they're trying to do is intersect these two types of physics, and at that intersection point is where time no longer exists. So this is actually known as the problem of time. And that's what that equation brings if they integrate the two theories. So there's actually now a minority of physicists, but there's a number that's growing that's starting to believe that there's no thing as time. And if you think about do you actually see time? No. I mean, if you're one of those people that are like Wheeler and DeWitt, they came up with the equation. They're obviously advocates of timeless universes. Then at that intersection of quantum mechanics and laws of relativity, they're going to say no. Yeah, we see a clock, I see a watch, but when you're saying that an object is moving, what you're really trying to say is that the object is here when the hand of my clock is here. And that goes on and on and on. So all of a sudden now everything is an event as opposed to the time. So
Got it.
you're only seeing the hands of time. You don't actually see, you only see the hands of the clocks. You're not seeing time itself.
Right. It's more of a symbol than an actual measurement of something tangible.
It's not
A clock
observable.
face. Yeah, right. So what?
So
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So obviously, if you have more research to share, I'd love to hear that. But I'm curious how that makes you think, or how you would apply that to your own life, maybe in a practical or human capacity.
yeah, all right. So I mean, that's the whole point. Like, how do you bring it back? I mean, because that's a pretty heady conversation. So how do you bring it back? If you are able to wrap your mind around the fact that time doesn't exist, but events do, uh, you're going to realize a couple things, I think, and that is that things are bigger than you. I think it's one of those things that also will put in perspective that if scientists are trying to still find intersections, then quite frankly, that we should be too. And we should be thinking about new ways of testing things or seeing how they work. But also, it helps you slow life down. I think one thing that you and I have talked about in the past is how the older you get, the faster time seems to be going.
Yep.
And maybe technology has a lot to do with that. But if you start to stop thinking about it as time and you start to think about it as events, you'll realize that it's going faster because your life, is becoming more routine as you get older. There aren't a lot of new things that you're doing as you're getting older. So now your life is more routine. As a part of that routine, technology is a part of our everyday life. So it's becoming a part of our routine. So we're blaming technology for speeding time up for us. But the reality is that we're not adding enough events in our life to slow it down. So if you can add more adventure to your life, if you can take every event, what we may normally call every second, take every event as an opportunity to see if you can make the best decision or have the best outcome, like that would be great. Obviously, that's taking a lot of practice personally. Um, but it's one of those things that I'm trying to incorporate in my life as a way of thinking so that I'm more adventurous and I'm more positive.
Got it. Got it. Well, I do agree with that. I think that by filling your life with meaningful events, you can feel like there's more volume to the years you're living. One thing though, I will offer, and I'd be interested to get your take here. I think there is a natural like constricting effect on your perception of time as you get older, regardless of how you're choosing to live your life. Because if you know, I don't think a 60-year-old could ever get to a point where they are able to make the next year feel as long as it did when they were 5 years old. Because I think when you're 5 years old, that fifth year that was 25% of your life, or it was 25% of your previous life, previous 4 years tacked on. So there's just that ratio. It feels like an incredible amount of time has passed relative to the entirety of your existence thus far. But when you're 60, that ratio of 1 year relative to the 60 you've already lived feels pretty small. So one thing that I think is important, and I don't mean to position this in a pessimistic way. I actually mean to position it, I guess, in a constructive way, because I think that a lot of times people think of years in the way that they thought of years when they were a kid. So if you think I have 40 years of life left, I have an eternity left, because
Yeah, but
at 5 years old.
how do you think about it personally?
Well, I think I do. I think I certainly think that way. I think that's the default mode for most people, just in terms of how they intuit the length of time they have left. Like when I'm 28, I have, let's say I hope live to 78, I have 50 years left. To me, that reads like a ton of time. But as I look back on, this decade that I already passed, it certainly felt like it passed much faster than I would have thought it would. But certainly it didn't feel like 10 years. So I think, going back to how I'm trying to position this in a constructive way, I think it's important to recognize that you might not have as much time as it feels like you have. So to your point, make the most of every year, of every month, of every week. And well, I'll hand it back to you, and then I got some other thoughts on that as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's like time will feel different when as you're experiencing it versus how you remember it. And again, this goes back to routines. So when you have a routine going, you don't really have to use a lot of brain power. You're not really necessarily engaging with new information. And so like you're now stuck in this automatic nature. And that's what's moving time faster for you. So you could be the 60-year-old and you could be saying like, okay, one more year in the fraction of life, you know, that kind of thinking is a routine type of thinking. If you want to make it memorable and slow it down, then you need to introduce novelty to your life. You need to learn new things, maybe accept a new challenge. You need to like literally step out of the norm, and that's how you'll slow it down.
Yeah, and I think one of the things working against us in that regard is the way that we've conceptualized and symbolized time so cyclically. We are cycling around a 7-day week, cycling around a 365-day year. There's these milestones throughout the year, be it like January 1st or Labor Day or your birthday, that people tend to try to shape as like turning points in their life. You know, my next birthday, I'll stop doing this or I'll start doing this. And I'm certainly guilty of this as well. I think a lot of people have had a New Year's resolution at one point or another. And I think that, you know, to your point about introducing novelty, I think it can be helpful to think of your life more linearly than cyclically, because you know, January 2021 feels as though it's a different version of January 2020, but really if you were to like lay out your life in a linear form as if it were a scroll, you know, you would be a year further along in your life, a year closer to the end. So, you know, I think it's, you know, it's helpful. The calendar obviously has major like practical benefits in terms of the way we organize our society, but I think it's important not to map your own life over a calendar, because it can kind of, you know, as I've been guilty of, it kind of deludes you into thinking that you'll get these new refreshes and there's always like a better time to start doing something. But if you just think of it as one long series of events, you know, then everything worth doing is time sensitive. Like if you want to do it now, you know?
That's exactly right. And, you know, that's the event horizon to me. You have an event horizon. When you're done with your event horizon, you're done. You don't even know if you're going to have more events. You have to be grateful for the events that have occurred though. And you have to just in that event, think about your reaction. So I think it's one of those things where it just boils down to, don't think of it as time. You have to think of it as events. And if you want to think of it as time, like you know, like the calendars, the clocks, you just mentioned it towards the end of that, where you're talking about like, it does make practical sense. Obviously, you know, it helps with organization. We'll know how to farm, and, you know, it's useful, but they don't actually tell time. The
Yeah,
thing that you
right.
can't see. So a clock doesn't actually measure time. You can even go back to like the prehistoric days. Imagine you're like early humankind. You barely have anything. There's like other early humans around you, right? You
No
have some
iPhones.
meat. You have some meat. There's no iPhones. You got a little meat. You killed an animal the other day. You got a little meat. You know, you killed them with your hands. You're all grunting at each other. Now imagine, right? They figured out how to use the sky and their observation as a way to go about capturing time. Like, we can think about going back all the way to that and the history of how people were capturing time. Like, how did you tell time before clocks? Until the clock came out, it was your observations in the sky. It was what the ancient Egyptians did, where they set up these like obelisks. I think that's what they're called, where they're basically monuments. And based on where the sun is, it's creating shadows, and they can then split up the days. They can split up the seasons. You obviously have the sundial. I mean, we could talk about the really, really historic ways of telling or keeping track of time, but they're not measuring it. And so that, I think when you think about that concept, you have to then sometimes reflect on personal experiences. You may have had a near-death experience that helps you think about it as events again, as opposed to it being as time. That
Interesting.
is that something that you agree? I mean, like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I think what clicked for me was like, you know, so at any given day we're, you know, some distance from the sun. We're at some point, you know, on our like elliptical orbit, and people recognize that and use that as a way of measuring time. But to your point about seeing it instead as a series of events, it's like, yeah, but a year later when we're back at that same point, so many different events have transpired on Earth. So even if not much has changed in the surrounding galaxy, we're at a very different point in that chain of events in terms of what's happened here. So Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about it. Cause even, even though there are cycles that recur, where we're at now in July of 2020 is a very different place than July of 2019, even though, we're at the same place relative to the sun where we were. And from a distance, it may look like everything is the same.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes it is good to have that perspective, but, it's in terms of the way that you're taking inventory of your own life and of, human activity in general. I think I'm totally on board with you now. I get it. Like, you want to see it as a sequence of events instead of something that's constricted by units of time. But you mentioned the idea of a near-death experience, and I know that we had talked a little bit about that leading up to this. I wonder if that's something that you wanted to elaborate more on, because I know it's something you had personal experience with.
I did have a personal experience with it, where I had a pretty serious brain injury when I was in college, and yeah, I just had a brain contusion, and it's one of those things where you realize how sensitive each event is, how precious each event is. I think it explains a little bit of why I take a look at life differently. I know it definitely changed my family, definitely changed, obviously, myself. It changed the people around me. I think it gave everyone perspective about how fragile everything is, and that, you have to really, again, think about each moment as an event and try to put yourself in the best situation possible. Um, it's actually hard to talk about. I didn't
Sure. Yeah.
realize that,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's one of those things where it happened. It's unfortunate. I actually think it's one of the best things that ever happened, because it did change the way I live life. It's made me, want to go 100% at all times. So I think that you don't have to be that extreme as it relates to having like a near death experience to realize like moments count. You can get that from people around you and their experiences, or you just have the insight to know. But I would also want to think about helping people change their mind around applying this concept to things that may be more prevalent in their daily lives,
Mm-hmm.
like investing or something like that, right? So if we go back to this concept of, okay, there's no such thing as time, there are events. One of the best things about us relative to other animals is our ability to anticipate future events.
Yes. Yeah.
So with that perspective and that ability, don't think your investing time frame is in terms of time. You have to think about it in terms of giving yourself the largest window of events possible. The reason you want to do that is because history or studies show that the longer you stay invested in the market, the greater your likelihood of returns are going to be positive. So said another way, in a timeless world, the number of events has increased where you can actually take advantage of the outcome being a positive return. So if you go back to 1929 and you look at rolling returns of stocks on a monthly perspective, there's a 60 to 65% chance that you're going to get a positive return. On a 1 year perspective, there's about a 75% chance that you get a positive return. On a 5 year perspective, there's an 89% chance that you get a positive return. And over a 10-year rolling period, going back to 1929, if you were invested in stocks, you had a positive return 95% of the time. So again, like, yes, it's what we're looking at is a period. When you look back, which again is our ability to look back, look forward, think of them as periods. Over the course of this period, the number of events that were positive were X, the number of events that were negative were Y. That is one way to think about
Yeah, I get it.
staying
Yeah.
invested.
Yeah.
And thinking about that as just giving yourself the longest event horizon possible in that perspective.
Yeah. And on that topic of negative events and good events and the importance of staying invested, if you do have a longer investment horizon, looking back over the 20-year period from 99 to 2018, and I think you're familiar with the statistics. If you missed the top 10 best days in the stock market, your overall return was cut in half. So people, when negative events do manifest, people understandably get very protective of their assets. But if you don't wait for those important positive events that are going to send the market the other way, then you have an opportunity of meaningfully impacting your future retirement in a negative way. And it's sad. And, it's sad to see people make that mistake because it can be so damaging. It's really not their fault. I mean, everyone, if you had money in the market this past spring, you know how scary it is to see what you've worked for slipping away from you. But it is just really, really important to stick around for those positive events because they can make all the difference.
It's you describing that to me when I was taking that in. It just it shines light on the power of an event. The power of missing one of those top performing days is so large, and that can be extrapolated across your rest of your life. But one of the things that you and I are trying to do, we're trying to intersect as many things as possible. We're trying to think about shifts. So what would you consider this, that one of the things that we're seeing right now in the investing world as a result of COVID is a shift from 60-40 portfolios to 80-20 portfolios?
Interesting. Well, it certainly seemed like a lot of the new money coming into the market is pretty risk on. Though I think, again, thinking about it as a series of events, I think if a series of very negative events do manifest in the coming months, I think that trend might be pretty short-lived. But I'm with you right now. I think people. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Yeah, no, I think people I think there's either a lot of people think that the market will continue to go up, particularly if it responds positively to another stimulus package. I think there are probably people on the sidelines right now with cash waiting for a sell-off and hoping to dump all of that cash into equities, risk on assets, and ride it back up. So I think there's a lot of people that are probably diverging from conventional wisdom right now because it's the first time I think we've seen the market shaken up like this in 10 years, and I think people are excited about the volatility and the fact that so much money is in motion right now. But it is important to remember that no one has a crystal ball. You don't know what that negative event will be in the future. You don't know what that positive event could be in the future. So it's hard to,
I would argue that you're going to see this 80-20 portfolio because there's trillions of dollars in central bank, balance sheets expansion across the globe that happened since March. And that's what's been supporting the financial markets. And you probably, there's a chance that you might see another fiscal package pass. So I think because of that, what happens, you're going to continue to see equity flows. And then you add to that government debt around the world, 70% of government debt around the world has a yield that's less than 0.5% right now.
Mm-hmm.
So your 60-40 model that nearly gave you double-digit returns over the last 5 decades, average annualized, is now expected to be mid-single digits, like 3 or 4%. So when you're in a world where you have all this cash coming in from the central banks, you have near zero yields, negative yielding debt actually is increased by 30%. 80-20 is the way to go if you had a goal in mind.
Right. And when you think about that 20, do you think that it will be fixed income or it will just be cash? Because
that's a great question. You may, because you want to have the cash on the sidelines, and if you take any guidance from what the VC world is doing, tons of investors in the VC world right now have cash. They're waiting 24 to 36 months. Now, granted, it's a little bit of a different investing style than, equities that trade daily, but it's that conservative nature. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, if I could share a little research, or I guess a framework that I'm stealing from a book that I read on Bitcoin around what makes certain currencies successful. I think it intersects with your comments around moving to an 80-20 portfolio, being in a historically low rate environment, and the idea of how time, or as we may call it, series of events, intersect with currency.
Can I stop you
So,
there?
sure.
It's gonna be really annoying at first when you start to think of it as a series of events. But you know what's gonna happen? You're gonna realize you remember a lot more. You've slowed time down. You're living a more fruitful life. At least that's the experience that I'm going through. Even though I've also gone through the experience of it being annoying, not only to me but to the people around me, where I just keep calling everything a series of events. But get through that. Get through that.
I know, dude. Yeah. Continue on that thread really quickly. I get what you're saying now, because you never really have time. Like, what is time? There's nothing. There's no real like cash value to time, but there is cash value to the events that make up your life. So instead of thinking of it like I have an hour, it's like, no, I have the opportunity to be with my wife and dog at the beach. You know what I mean? Instead, because time is just an abstraction, but the event is something concrete that you can pin value on. So I get what you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So going back to the currency thing. So currencies are successful, whether they were like seashells, glass beads, gold, silver, coins in earlier civilizations, or fiat now, in the modern age. They've been successful if they have salability across space. So can you travel with it? Salability across scale. Can you use both small quantities and large quantities? And this is probably the most important one, at least as it's articulated by the author that I'm reading, salability across time. So will, the currency that I hold now actually have value later on, years from now? And the salability across time is primarily measured by the stock to flow ratio. So how much currency is there out there right now relative to how much currency is being created? And currencies with a high stock to flow ratio are considered to maintain their salability across time. They're called hard currencies, and currencies with low stock to flow ratios are considered, easy money, in the sense that the value is being inflated away by virtue of flows, new money being created, uh, that stock to flow ratio going the other way. So the flows are going up, and stock is staying the same. So you get a numerator denominator problem where you're creating more money than you should relative to what's already out there. So I think when we think about the $2 trillion CARES Act, I think when we think about the next $1 trillion stimulus package, a lot of us are thinking about the impact on inflation. I think framing it in terms of salability across time and the stock to flow ratio is an important way of conceptualizing it, thinking about how many new dollars we're creating relative to how many dollars are currently out there. And I haven't really sunk my teeth further into that, but I think getting a better understanding of that ratio can help you prepare accordingly. And I guess the last thing I would say here is, I think that at least when, as I've been growing up in my adult life, people around me that have gave me investment advice have really emphasized having conviction in the underlying investment and where that will be years from now. But I think there's a new dimension here that I think our generation will have to give greater consideration to, which is, think about where the currency, the underlying currency of that investment you own will be in 20 or 30 years. And that's a much harder thing to predict, but it's something that can impact the value of your investment in a very meaningful way when you go to withdraw it and use it in the world. So
It's going to
yeah.
influence your value of yourself as well, because your currency of the future is going to be the number of followers you have. If it's like, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. It matters right now how much of an audience you have, how much mind share you have. So you want to talk about currency being thought of differently? Yeah, the way it's housed, which is what you're talking about, but also like what is it going to transform into? Because what if you are able to just assert a value to yourself based on the number of followers, because that is the new currency of the future.
Are you talking in terms of like the kind of opportunity for influencing and the economic value of that?
Exactly. And think about all the things that are changing. I mean, if you want to make it a little bit of a more interesting way of thinking about where money is flowing and how that might impact the value of currency, I don't know. Have you thought about that in the context of online sports betting, in the context of, sports coming back, in the context of you saw all the flow go into the equity market because sports were gone. Sports are now back. People are going to wonder or think about where they're going to flow their money. Does it go into sports world? Well, I can tell you that DraftKings actually, they said that the number of bets on Thursday night's game between the New York Yankees and the Washington Nationals, which was the first major league game of the year, was the highest for a baseball game in the history of this DraftKings sportsbook. So for whatever that's worth, at least from their perspective on their sportsbook, it was the highest for a baseball game ever.
Wow.
And from a viewership perspective, that game had more viewers than any other game in the last 9 years.
Wow. Yeah. I think people are hungry for their sports. It's hard, the sports bet for someone who's not into it. It's hard for me to figure out where, how much of that is a reflection of people's passion for sports and how much of it is people's passion for, gambling essentially. So
That's what I'm saying. In the context
Yeah.
of the market, does it reverse flows out of the market into sports books? What impact does that have on the equity market? Considering you have to also think about the number of new accounts that were added in the period of COVID. So again, thinking about it as events as opposed to times, we are an event COVID. And in this event COVID, which we'll look back on it as a period, in this period of COVID, as the event, think about all the changes that are occurring. We just talked about the online sports betting because sports had to go away for a while. You mentioned you mentioned money flows. Well, a lot of the equity flows that happen in the market happen from average investors that were on Robinhood accounts.
Yep.
So, it's also, in terms of intersecting events and trying to apply it to a new space that I'm interested in, which is the cannabis world. I've been doing a lot of research there, a lot of work thinking about that space recently. I'm trying to learn a lot about it and just be a sponge. So in terms of trying to shine light on how you can think of the event of COVID and how it's changing that world, you can look at all the disruption that's taking place on the delivery side of the equation. You can look at a company like FlowHub, for example. They're a company that helps cannabis retailers manage compliance. They manage the supply chain. They manage reporting and transactions. They're managing inventory. And it's the event of COVID that's seeing this increased demand in cannabis, where you have projected sales over the next 7 years that is going to be north of $40 billion. When you can automate business operations, you're going to take advantage. So technology is disrupting the cannabis space. You look at a company like Dutchy, where they've created the easiest way to get a delivery from a dispensary in Oregon. You look at a company like Canna Taxware, which now with all the disruption being on the delivery side, and thoughts being of, hey, what does the future dispensary look like? Do you really need that amount of bud tenders? Well, anyway, going back to what Canna Taxware does, they now calculate the tax on the delivery based on the location. So they've automated sales tax because now delivery is such an important part of the operation, you have to
Mm,
have software that gets that right. So again, like time doesn't exist, events do. And as a result of the event, there's subsequent other events. And when we look back on the sequence of events, that's what we normally call time. But if you look at that, you'll see all the change, you'll see all the disruption that's taking place on an event by event basis.
for sure. No, it makes a lot of sense.
My head
Just the,
hurts. I'm like,
I
this is a heady
know.
conversation. I don't even know if our audience is still with us, but I think there's a ton of insight here. And I think it, again, it's, uh, we're blending different things. We're adding perspectives. And again, my biggest takeaway was that maybe time doesn't exist, you know?
For sure. Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, no, I know. I actually really liked your point there. I mean, you had mentioned in the first episode that it could require up to like $1 million cash to open a dispensary. What do you think that shakeout will look like? Will dispensaries come back, or will those small business owners be damaged in a lasting way? Or can I know you've done a fair amount of digging here? Is it easy for dispensaries to adapt their business model to more of a a delivery business model?
It certainly seems like it. Like obviously I don't own one,
Yeah.
but in conversations and just reading about it, it seems like it was a pretty easy switch, and a lot of it had to do with the increased demand. When people were home, demand went through the roof in a number of states, and the result of that is an increase in tax revenue. But that's a different subject. But yeah, they were able to just do the deliveries. They could do curbside pickup. Um, and so I know even when I was living in San Francisco, you would drive by some of them and you would see people 6 feet apart, and it's all good. But as it relates to like the future of a dispensary, again, a company like Flow Hub, which I mentioned earlier, they actually help with dispensary designing and
Mm,
customer flow. And so I, again, trying to connect the dots personally, I think anyone who's listening to this would be able to uh, come to this conclusion that if you don't have a lot of people out, you don't necessarily need to think about customer flow in your store. You may think about how to downsize that to save on the cost perspective, considering you have such a large amount put up in cash just to own the place.
yeah.
So there are adjustments that are probably being made, but I don't know of any specific ones. This is just me speculating as to what is probably happening.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was driving through San Francisco on Friday night and passed a karaoke bar that was obviously shut down, and it did. The question for me is like, will some of those more novelty goods and services, if they've shut down now, disappear forever? We all know that restaurants, hotels, airlines have been terribly impacted by this, and a number of other sectors as well. But I wonder if something like karaoke, where it was kind of a novelty thing to begin with, if that bar unfortunately has to shutter, permanently, will there be someone coming in to backfill it with karaoke, or will we see certain things disappear permanently and be replaced by other sort of novelties? So that's just one example, and I know that karaoke bars aren't or a small sliver of all of the businesses and industries that are being and families that are being really negatively impacted by COVID. But it did make me wonder if there will be certain things that are just relegated to the past now as we kind of realign ourselves for a post-COVID future.
There's no doubt. And you mentioned, is it going to be replaced by novelty? Well, that's what I'm saying. Think about time as events. Add novelty to your life by taking advantage of events. If you want to bring everything full circle, I'm going to bring everything full circle back to there's no time, there's events. But as it relates to this, yeah, dude, I mean, there's no doubt. Um, I mean, do you feel comfortable, for example, going to a comedy club, going to a bar? I'm
I
still
know.
not there, but I'm
No, I'm
also at a
not there.
point where it's like, I'm like tired of thinking about this, you know? There's only so much new things you can do. And like, I'll play devil's advocate with myself. It's like, okay, I'm telling myself to do new things, but at some point you do want to just like hang out at the bar again or go grab dinner and not worry about it. And so I just haven't had the ability to get over that hurdle. Even though I see people out and about, I also notice that, the numbers are increasing. But again, I don't want to get down that route. That's just something that is a boring conversation at this point. But let's bring this back to just the impact on, technology, because we're going to continue to see that type of disruption. And, we mentioned investing earlier. So just going back to our experience, we know that this is existing already, but it's definitely going to have more momentum. And that is, if you think about financial advisors right now, their communication tools are shifting. So their video, their social, the way they're interacting with clients is changing. I know that the way that uh, we were interacting with financial advisors was changing. We were doing a lot of video calls. So again, thinking of it as an event, the event of COVID has will be the quote unquote time where we look back and say, wow, we saw a lot of disruption. And there's no doubt that as a result of that, you're going to see antiquated businesses that just don't exist anymore.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have an excerpt here from an essay by George Orwell that will seem a little far afield, but I thought it could be maybe a way for people to put um, the amount of free time they have now, if they are working at home, in perspective relative to what it was like being a working person, nearly 100 years ago now. So maybe I'll share this, and if you want to follow this thread, we'll see where it goes. If
I
not, we
love
can
that.
wrap it up. But okay, cool. So George Orwell wrote The Road to Wigan Pier in 1937. It's published in 1937, and it was an essay that he wrote while he was living alongside coal miners in the industrial north of England. Orwell was middle class as opposed to working class, so he, I think had as he articulates in the essay, a reverence for the grit of the working class in England at that time, and wanted to get a better understanding of what life was like for them. And he paints a pretty gritty picture of both their living conditions and of their working conditions. So I'm going to share an excerpt here when Orwell is discussing at length the effort that it took on the part of the miners just to get to the coal face. Once they were down there, they're already football fields below the Earth's surface, but once you get down the shaft, it's not like you're right at the coal face ready to start digging. You have to travel through tunnels for pretty tremendous distance just to begin work. So I thought I would share this.
Coal miners, man.
Yeah, share this with you here. So
bring those jobs back, right?
yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's a different era. So it starts with, quote, "What is surprising, on the other hand, is the immense horizontal distances that have to be traveled underground. Before I had been down a mine, I had vaguely imagined the miner stepping out of the cage and getting to work on a ledge of coal a few yards away. I had not realized that before he even gets to work, he may have to creep through passages as long as from London Bridge to Oxford Circus. In the beginning, of course, a mine shaft is sunk somewhere near a seam of coal, but as that seam is worked out and fresh seams are followed up, the workings get further and further from the pit bottom. If it is a mile from the pit bottom to the coal face, that is probably an average distance. 3 miles is a fairly normal one. There are even said to be a few mines where it is as much as 5 miles, but these distances bear no relation to distances above ground. For in all that mile or 3 miles as it may be, there's hardly anywhere outside the main road, and not many places even there where a man can stand upright." Then he goes into detail about how difficult it is and how hot and cramped it is just getting from one end of the tunnel to the other. And he wraps it up by saying, "It may seem that I am exaggerating, though no one who has been down an old-fashioned pit — most of the pits in English are old-fashioned — and actually gone as far as the coal face is likely to say so. But what I want to emphasize is this. Here is this frightful business of crawling to and fro, which to any normal person is a hard day's work in and of itself. And it is not part of the miner's work at all. It is merely an extra, like the city man's daily ride in the tube. The miner does that journey to and fro, and sandwiched in between there are 7.5 hours of savage work. I've never traveled much more than a mile to the coal face, but often it is 3 miles, in which case I and most people other than coal miners would never get there at all. This is the kind of point that one is always liable to miss. When you think of a coal mine, you think of depth, heat, darkness, blackened figures hacking at walls of coal. You don't think necessarily of those miles of creeping to and fro. There is the question of time also. A miner's working shift of 7.5 hours does not sound very long, but one has got to add on to it at least an hour a day for traveling, more often 2 hours and sometimes three. Of course, the traveling is not technically work and the miner is not paid for it, but it is as like work as makes no difference. So I think, compared to, end quote, compared to many people's situation that may be working from home, as a knowledge worker, I think, just, obviously everyone has challenges and idiosyncrasies of their own life that other people may not find enviable. But I think, relative to the working conditions of yesteryear and of people in those types of roles now all over the planet, there's a lot to be grateful for. So that's just what I wanted to emphasize.
Always got to be grateful. I mean, yeah, you think about the series of events that take place in that miner's day-to-day operation relative to your series of events, and that'll just put in perspective of where you may want to be mentally. I
For
know
sure.
when you were reading that, I was getting motivated of, yeah, I mean, it's not that bad and I can do the things that I think I want to do. And, that ability is something that we should all be grateful for. Um, and would you, if you think about expanding this a little bit, would you then think about the greatest accomplishment in life is how you can control your events? In other words, when people say, "Oh, I want all the time in the world," maybe what they're really asking for is just the ability to control every event that's taking place. So your freedom, your ability to look at it as events, isn't that the greatest accomplishment if you have full control of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, if you can put yourself in a position to really author those events instead of letting them happen to you, I think that, I would imagine, for most people would feel like self-realization. If you wake up every day in the driver's seat as opposed to being sort of the object of the circumstances of your life, all different events happening to you, and influencing your behavior rather than your behavior influencing the events around you. I think that there's something incredibly empowering about having that level of control over your life. And one thing I wanted to run by you that's related to that: how do you think about the difference between schedules and goals? Because I think both are important, but when the metaphor that I've kind of been teasing out is the idea of like walking through a forest at night. And I think, humans fear darkness because fundamentally the unknown threats lurk in the darkness. And I think people fear the future because same deal. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Unknown threats lurk in our futures as well. And I think the way that I think about it, a goal is like both goals and schedules are lights that you can shine into the darkness. And a goal may be a bigger light, but it's sort of diffused weakly over the darkness in front of you. So it gives you a vague sense of what could happen over a greater period of time. But a schedule is like a small, really bright light where it doesn't, tell you where you're going to be in a month or 2 months or a year from now. But a schedule can help you have a very clear understanding of what tomorrow holds. And, and I think if you could walk confidently into the darkness that is tomorrow, you'll feel more and more in control of your life. So I just, with, whether you want to take up the metaphor or not, I guess what's your overall thinking about prioritizing schedule versus goals?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the way I was thinking about it in the context of this conversation is maybe schedules are more going to play along with your episodic memories, and what you can take from those memories is what you've learned in each episode and how you may want to apply it moving forward, so you can create a schedule for yourself. And then maybe the goals perspective, since it's not shining a light on everything, you mentioned vague, maybe that's going to play with your the your memory based on associations with things, like more like a dog, right? So a dog may have more of an association memory than we do. We have more of the episodic memory. We have more of a schedule. The dog has a goal, which is, I just want to please my owner, not do anything disruptive, and just be a nice little puppy. So maybe scheduling is something that occurs because we have the ability to really get into the episodic memories that we have. And the goals are more of that, hey, I want to associate myself with a movement that's going in this direction. I want to be more positive. I want to eat better. I want to associate myself with this goal. But my episodic events create the schedule.
And tell me more about episodic memory. Have you been doing a little reading about that? Because I'm not really familiar with the distinction between the two types of memory.
Well, I mean, so it's going to now get into the conversation of how we basically differ relative to animals. Because the association memory, this is, okay, so there's research that's been done on how dogs perceive time. It's not that extensive. There's some research, but there's more research on like what takes place with primates, birds, and rodents. And there's a guy out there, his name's William Roberts. He's a animal cognition researcher, and he has some pretty interesting conclusions. And he basically talks about how animals are stuck in time because they don't have the ability like we do. It's a pretty sophisticated ability to perceive time. Like they're not truly forming memories. They're only living in the present. So he thinks that animals are stuck in time because they can't mentally time travel. Like we can go backwards, we can go forwards. That's something that we can do as a human, and we can do that consciously. And we can go back to a specific event, which is an event, which could be a good memory or a bad memory, but an animal can't do that. And when it comes to, well, okay, then tell me about training. Like, how can a dog know what to do when I trained it?
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
But there's no episode where they remember the moment they got trained. So they don't have a memory of the particular event. They don't have that sense of self the way that we do. So they don't have the mental ability to know where or how they learned it. Like a kid doesn't know the moment they learned how to crawl. It's the same thing. Like that's
yeah, right. Yeah, so
and
it's
so
almost like they're just responding to stimulation as opposed to like consciously remembering what they're supposed to do. It's like
you nailed it, because then you want to apply that to, all right, well then I know my dog, like once 4:30 rolls around, is lurking like a shark in some water, is looking for food, but we don't feed him till 5. So okay, what about the food? I mean, to me, it's like you look at that dog and you're like, holy moly, he knows the time. But actually what's happening is the dogs have a circadian oscillator. So they actually have daily fluctuations of hormones, body temperature, and neural activity. And that's taking place. So when that's taking place in their body, they then know that food is going to be served, or then they know that, oh, my owner is going to come home. So we're perceiving it as they know the time, but they're perceiving the event in their biological system and their biological state, that when this event occurs, the outcome of this event is food is going to be served. So every day when that event occurs, they're reacting to the stimulus. You mentioned stimulus. They're reacting to the stimulus, but we're looking at it as they know the time. No. They know the event. So again, going back to time doesn't exist. Events do. And so that's what's going on, but they can associate with certain things, right? So they can associate you with food. They can associate a park with a good time. So they have positive, negative association memories, which to me, going back to your question, would be like goals. And we have positive and negative associations. Like my goals are, I want to be aligned and associated with things that are positive. I want to be aligned and associated with things that will help me get to a point where, I own a company or own a business or something like that, right? So I'm aligning myself with those goals. So that's going back to more of my association memory. But because I'm a human and I can have pure episodic memory, and as I get older, I remember exactly why certain things happened, or I remember exactly the moment my life changed. That creates the schedule in my life.
I totally understand. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. You think about the way that you conceptualize who you want to be in the future, it is definitely driven by your associations with like certain values. Like that is more kind of abstract in some sense. Like you whether it's I want to be a great husband or a business owner or a father or a pillar of my community. Usually people are setting goals that are sort of noble and have some sort of moral value associated with them, and then the schedule is really the building blocks to get to that, and it is more episodic in the sense that days kind of follow a serial pattern. They're made up of schedules are more well defined in that sense, and they're more delineated by specific events, while goals are related to your principles in a sense more so than the schedule. But I think what can be really powerful is when the schedule and the goals are aligned. You feel
Mhm.
that when you can carry out a schedule where you at the end of the day you can say, if I do exactly what I did today, tomorrow I'll be that much closer to my goal. It's you sleep so much better than saying like, pretty good day, but like there are two or three things that I need to stop doing if I want to get to where to get to my terminal goal. I feel like when you find that alignment, going back to the idea of self realization, things really do start to come together. And I think yeah, man. I mean, I think personal development, in a sense, is kind of like investing. Going back to our conversation around investing, I think if you stay like modestly invested in a specific habit or behavior, you'll see major dividends manifest over the long term. So like you don't necessarily need to go run a marathon or go on a meditation retreat. I think building like 20 minutes of exercise or 20 minutes of meditation into your schedule, that will play out in gains over time. So it's like let the long term be your friend when you're setting your schedule, because you'll get that compounding effect of doing a little bit of the right thing every day.
You open up the window of the number of events that could go your way.
Yep.
So
Yep.
why do you, so I mean, if you think about this, I mean, if you really want to bend your mind a little bit, then if you really think about it as events and not time, you'll start to think about it as a two-way process. Most people think of time as a one-way process. Would you agree that you think of time as always going forward?
Um. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I guess I do.
why
Yeah.
does it never reverse? Why does time never reverse, even though there's no laws that restrict it? So if you want to go back to science and laws, there's no laws that restrict that.
For sure.
But
Yeah. For
we
sure. Yeah.
assume it's a one-way process, and maybe the thoughts around the Big Bang and how there's ever, constant expansion, that's giving us the direction where we think it's a one-way process. But my point is that if you stop thinking of things as time, you'll think of it as events. When you think of it events, all of a sudden you can also now think of it as a two-way process, because you'll be able to look at previous events, you'll be able to anticipate future events, and you'll be thinking about your current event.
But to ask this question, why can, if it is two way, why can we change the future but we can't change the past?
Because you don't know what's going to happen next. And
I don't know the answer to this either, because the
you
thing
can't
for,
change either of them. You can only change the outcome of the event that you're in. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can't change what's going to happen in the next event.
got it,
You
yeah,
can't,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
if you look at it as a series of events, you will, again, this is something I'm trying to practice. So I'm not an expert here. I'm working through this, and I hope this is something that's going to be inspirational for people. But when you think about it as a series of events, you're going to give yourself a chance to say, okay, I want this to be the most positive outcome possible. Now, for me personally, that means control what I say, control how I say it, control anxiety, control, mood swings. Because I'm thinking, okay, this event is occurring. Let's think about the way to make this the most fun possible or the most light-hearted as possible. And so, they say time heals. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
say events heal,
I like that.
right?
Yeah.
The more events you go through, the more chance you have to actually execute on the things that you're trying to practice internally. And so over a series of events, you learn how to heal. So time doesn't exist, events do.
Yeah, that's a really, really powerful point, man. Because like if you have a bad event and then it's followed by a series of a sequence of, bad events moving forward, those bad events probably aren't going to heal the first event. It's the fact that like bad event will happen, it will be followed by good events, which will make you recontextualize the bad event. So it's not really the passage of time that healed the wound. It's that you got new experiences that allowed you to recontextualize the thing that you thought was a really negative point in your life. I think that's really, really powerful, and I think that's um, the sort of, I think it speaks to the power of creating the right feedback loops, because I think there's kind of I think we all grew up thinking like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I think there is some truth to that. But you look at I think some of the most successful people in the world, some of the most fulfilled people, they were really in a pattern of like good events precipitating good events, and like people who are really stuck in a rut are probably trapped in a cycle of bad events precipitating bad events. So, what doesn't kill you makes you strong, doesn't kill you makes you stronger is true in some sense if you take a lesson from that bad event and are able to use it to generate good events. But
Exactly.
that alone won't make you stronger. It's the new events that you create in the future that make you stronger.
And that's how you get out of it. That's how you dig out of it. That's how you get out of a streak of bad events. I mean, another way you might want to think about it is baseball players. I mean, baseball players, dude, to be considered a Hall of Famer, you need to have 3 good events out of every 10 events. If you want to call a
Yeah.
baseball at bat an event,
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
if you have 3 good ones out of every 10, you're batting 300. That's Hall of Fame numbers, So try to get to a point where every 10 events that take place over a course of a period, at least 3 of those, make them positive, if not more. You obviously
Nice.
want to have more, but
Nice.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
get your batting average up.
Yep. Yeah. Hall of Fame life. Yeah. No, I think one more point there. I think that I think we have a natural tendency, at least I do, to try to like cease engaging in bad behavior that lead to bad events. I think an alternative way of thinking about it is trying to crowd out those bad events with good events. So if you're trying to eat differently, instead of making a list of things you can't eat, make a list of things you should eat and eat those things. And chances are you'll be a lot less hungry and a lot less motivated to eat those things that you don't want to eat. So even if it's like changing, behavior, like I want to be more, I don't know, like I want to be more reliable with people. Instead of framing it in your head of like I have to stop flaking on people, it's like no, like I'm anytime I commit to something, I'm going to do it. Like my policy is I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And that I think that's a much more kind of positive way of creating goals for yourself and of moving towards those behaviors will be more beneficial to your life in the long run, instead of feeling like there's a list of things you can't do. It's like, no, write the list of things that you should do.
Exactly. give it new meaning, give it a new energy. And going back to like perspectives that time may be running out or your events may be running out. See, I still make the mistake too.
Yeah,
If going back to near death experience again, it's like that is an event where you realize how much each event can matter. Missing one of the best performing days in the market can matter, but like falling, hitting your head in the street, and not protecting yourself also matters. And knowing how that could be a last event and that can change you. It also changes the people that are around you. It actually changes them in two ways if you think about it, because one is where people can find inspiration and they say, hey, you know what, like I'm pretty lucky right now, I'm not going to complain today. Or it's the other way where it literally changes you and you realize, hey, like my events are limited. I've had a close call. Now my life has a new priority. My life has a new meaning. My life has a new energy. And just by that, you're going to probably change the people that are around you and who you surround yourself with. So that's how it can change change the people around you too.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely, man. And they're good events. If you're around people that you love, that are experiencing good events, that hopefully will lead to a better probability that you yourself will experience good events. That's why I think I think it is really good, important to root for people. And I think that, it can be easy to, uh, fall into envy traps or resentment traps, and the opportunity to go overseas by myself last summer. And I feel really grateful that I had that opportunity, especially now amid COVID and the future of travel and all that. But one of the first things that I realized the week I was out there, after I had been totally plucked from my social orbit and my life, and I just was like a stranger in a foreign land, nobody to anybody out there, I was like, why would I ever like root against anyone? Like, even someone that I don't like that much, why would I not celebrate their successes and the good things they do just as much as I would celebrate it if it were like my brother? Because like the more good events that are happening, the higher likelihood that there will be good events happening for people I care about and for myself. Like you want to, don't root against the world. We're all interconnected. All of our events are interconnected. Even if someone's not your favorite person, don't root against them. And it's a lighter way to go through life, I think, just kind of rooting for everyone and rooting for good as an ideal, instead of like saying, well, I'm rooting for this person, I'm rooting against this person. And there's certain domains like sports where you have to do that. It's fun, it's a symbolic rivalry. But I think just in life in general, root for positive outcomes for everyone.
Well, in the Buddhist world, there's a concept called mudita. Mudita means finding joy in others, celebrating it. And by doing that, you find the joy in yourself.
Nice. I like that.
So yeah, the Dalai Lama, he talks about that all the time. I came across that in the Book of Joy. It's definitely something that I would recommend. But so I want to go back to something that you were saying, because you're talking about rooting for people, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that we can do to change the perception of even a conversation, instead of asking how someone's day is, ask them tell me about your sequence of events. I know it's a really weird question, but ask them how is your sequence of events. And first of all, they're not going to know what you just asked. Then they're going to actually have to think about, like, they're going to go back to the events of the last period that they remember, and they may give you a better answer than, oh, my day was good, oh, my day's going, oh, it's going. People love to say it's
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
Going
Interesting.
where?
Yeah.
Tell me about
Uh,
your
uh,
sequence of events. I'll tell you about my sequence of events. And now we can have a more engaging conversation. You build empathy that way. So instead of asking people, if you're going to root for people, root for them, and then add the layer of asking how their sequence of events has been going, as opposed to how's your day. Because not everyone, but a lot of people just, push that question under the rug. You ask
sure.
somebody how
Yeah.
their sequence of events is, you'll get them to start thinking. and you may get some more insight into them.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that definitely inspires people to share more than just the generic ask, because people are so used to just, responding with a pleasantry that gives you no insight into how their actual day went. I mean, people say going well. You could have your dog run over and you probably still say, "Oh, yeah, it's going well," if you don't know the person. So I think getting more out of people that you're unfamiliar with, it's important to be clever in your questions, and I think that's a really good example of that. What I actually did want to ask you, I know that you are really good at asking for people's time, and it's challenging in today's environment because people are bombarded with emails, phone calls. Everyone's short on time to some extent, but even more than that, there's so many requests already out there. It's hard to differentiate yourself from the other people asking for time. So, how do you, how do you show respect for their humanity and respect for their accomplishments and like interest in engaging with them without coming off groveling or like looking like you're it's a quid pro quo and you want something in return? How do you do that in a productive way as to secure time on their calendar or to secure an event on their calendar?
Yeah, I mean, you can think about this in multiple perspectives. I think the more tangible one is where you offer as much value as possible. Where, again, for me personally, if you can't tell, I'm into researching things. I'm into delivering the insights. I'm into saying or sharing something that you may not know that could potentially make you better.
Yep.
But that needs to happen. Those events need to occur numerous times where you expect nothing in return. I know that, if you're in sales, your metric is number of meeting counts. And so in that perspective, what are you doing? Well, I would offer value around business building ideas, different ways the advisor could be more efficient within their practice, different levels of insight around, hey, here's a third party website you may want to visit that's not your firm specific or my firm specific, but it's going to help you show your clients that you're thinking outside the box. That is the type of stuff that will get you meetings. But again, going back to the more general way, you have to build an energy around giving before taking. There's way too many people that take from the game. They take way
Yep.
more than they give.
Yep.
So in this world, it's going to take a series of events, but those events have to be impactful or valuable. And you can't get discouraged if there's no response back. What you need to do is continue to deliver the value.
Yep. And to get at the order of operations here, if you're like reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, will you add value
Oh yeah.
without even an ask associated with in the beginning? Will you ever like reach out to someone with the express purpose of just sharing information with them, doing that a couple times and then
Oh,
making the ask later? Is that kind of the cadence?
absolutely. 100%. Just the other day, there was one person in my network who posted that LinkedIn has created a new feature where, as part of your skills, you can add cannabis. So, it's usually like accounting or whatever, skills, finance, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, cannabis. So he screenshotted that and he had posted it. And so in the comment section, I just tagged all the people that I've networked with recently in the cannabis space and left it at that. No
Nice.
ask, no nothing. Just tag them on a post that had to do with something that could increase their visibility, their, brand. And for me, what did I get out of it? Nothing. But for me, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Totally, man. Totally. No, I think that's really powerful, and I think it speaks to the importance of coming from a genuine place when you're trying to add value. It's not just about like, let me add value now so I can get value back later. It's like I'm going to adopt a stance where I want to add value in people's lives, and I have confidence that it will be returned to me. I don't know by who, I don't know when, but I feel like if I am a additive force in whatever industry or social network, that will precipitate good things later on. So yeah,
I want to be the bee that went out there, got some food, came back to the hive, did the wiggle dance so all the bees around me understood where they can get food too.
I've heard
Why?
you say the wiggle. Is that a real thing? Is the wiggle dance a real thing?
The wiggle dance is a real thing.
Mm, I get it. I get it.
They
Yeah, you
they
want to be the
in
provider. Yeah.
No, I just want to be someone who can share information that's going to help the person next to me. I don't want to be a provider per
Well,
se.
providing information.
Yeah, that's true. But
Yeah.
but for me, it's just like, I don't want to be a resource hoarder.
Sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Give it away.
There's really no benefit to it. Yeah.
Actually, going back to the time conversation, one of the important reasons you want to share knowledge with people is because there's potential that if civilizations die out, the knowledge dies out as well. So if you look at ancient Sumerians, which is a group of people that took over Mesopotamia, which is like current day Baghdad and Iran and that whole region,
Yep.
they also had a way of telling time, but over the course of periods, that knowledge was lost and really wasn't passed down. So ancient Egyptians are given a lot of credit for coming up for, ways of telling time, but you have to go back in periods, and if the knowledge isn't passed down, it could be lost. I know that the civilization was lost, but my whole point is you just never know if the information is lost at some point.
That's true.
But
Yeah, that
then
is.
who cares if it's lost?
Well, I know that they can go down a philosophical rabbit hole there too. But I hear you. I think going back to what we talked about in the first episode, you never know if there are things that that other people don't, and God forbid some unfortunate accident does happen, and those secrets pass with you. There's no opportunity for yeah. There was like a line from Car Seat Headrest, is one of my favorite bands. um I forget exactly what the first clause of it is, but I think it goes like, "When I'm gone, all this information will die." And he, I think, alludes to like writing on his laptop earlier in the song or something like that. But there's so much that we have in here, or we have on like our personal devices, that are rich content that if something were to happen for us, it's gone. So don't be greedy about it. Like, get it out. You'll have wanted to have gotten it out, because once you're gone, there's no reviving that wisdom or that knowledge that may have been unique to you.
It's just an element of realizing that this is bigger than yourself, just like the concept of going down the route that time doesn't exist. If you really start to adopt that, you'll realize this is bigger than yourself as well. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this was a robust conversation. I think there
For
was a
sure.
lot of insight. We learned a few things. Um, I think that we can help people think about their usage of each event um, moving forward. I mean, what are your thoughts? How would you want to wrap this up? And I actually, if you don't mind, before I pass it over to you, I'll wrap it up with one last thing. It's a trivia question.
Okay.
Do you know who built America's first clock? I don't want to put you
America's
on.
first clock. I do not know. I'm not even
It's
gonna
all
wager
good.
a guess.
I'm
Yeah.
not gonna like put people on the spot like
Yeah.
that. It's awkward. But so his name was Benjamin Banneker. He was a free black, and he created a wooden device that struck hourly in 1753. He was 22 years old.
No way.
If you Google this guy, Benjamin Banneker, it turns out that he ends up also creating one of the first almanacs in U.S. history. In 1789, he accurately predicted a solar eclipse. And then the one from me that's relevant for what's going on in the world today, in 1791, he convinced by writing to Thomas Jefferson that blacks were intellectually equal to whites.
Wow. Wow.
Benjamin
Coming,
Banneker.
yeah, coming from a person of an intellectual caliber, hopefully to the audience, it was self-evident at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Benjamin Banneker, homie, he built the first clock in America, and He was 22 years old, and it was 1753.
Wow. In that, it was at like a public, like a clock in a public area, or was that the first clock ever in America?
Interesting question that I don't know the answer to. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
like a clock tower,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
regardless,
That's cool. I
yeah,
want to learn more. That's really interesting, man. Yeah. It would be nice if, if school, elementary school, middle school laced those kind of anecdotes in with the core curriculum. Going back to like your comments around uh, drugs in the Third Reich in the last episode. There's so much interesting trivia out there that really can help you um, look at history differently and with a little bit more clarity and lucidity. And I think, yeah, that's a really nice point of trivia.
beautiful.
Yeah, man. Well, no, I thought it was a great conversation too, dude. I think, the big takeaway for me is trying to think of time as a series of events, and just making sure that when you look back on those events after they've transpired, that they're you were there to author them. You were as much in the driver's seat over the course of your life as you could be. um, Not only will it lead to probably a preponderance of good events, but it will also just lead you to a deeper feeling of self-realization. And it's like, I had one life, I had one shot here, and I chose how to live my life. It wasn't chosen for me. So yeah.
Absolutely. Like, you write your own story.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, go write your story with the rest of the afternoon that you got here. I'll write mine, and we'll be circling back next week, bro.
Appreciate it. And thank you if you tuned in. We appreciate you listening, open to feedback, and we look forward to the next one. Take care, guys.